the first thing I noticed was the ceiling. It wasn't my ceiling. Mine has a water stain shaped like a misshapen boot in the upper left corner. This one was smooth, white, and impossibly clean. The kind of ceiling that belongs to someone who has never once let anything go wrong in their life. Then the smell hit me. Something warm. Expensive. A perfume that didn't belong to anyone I knew casually. I sat up slowly, and the room tilted. My head was a construction site. I looked down, still dressed, shirt wrinkled, one shoe missing, but dressed. That was either very good news or a story I wasn't ready to hear yet. Then the doorway filled. She stood there in a charcoal silk robe, holding 2 cups of coffee, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Susan, my boss, the woman who once made a senior VP cry in a glass-walled conference room, and then went back to her salad like nothing happened. She looked at me the way you look at a puppy who's chewed your favorite shoe. Amused, unbothered, completely in control. She tilted her head and said it. I remember everything, Richard. Do you? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. She crossed the room with the kind of quiet confidence that never needed an audience, set one of the coffee cups on the nightstand beside me, and then settled into the armchair across from the bed. Legs crossed, robe perfectly draped, like she was chairing a board meeting instead of watching her employee have a silent breakdown on her Egyptian cotton sheets. Cream. No sugar, she said, nodding at the cup. You told me last night. Twice, actually. You were very insistent about the sugar part. I stared at the coffee. I talked to you last night? Extensively. The corner of her mouth lifted. Just barely. You're surprisingly philosophical after 4 glasses of whiskey, Richard. I picked up the cup and wrapped both hands around it. Mostly because I needed something to hold on to. The warmth helped. The clarity did not come. I pressed my fingers against temple and tried to pull the night back into focus. The office party. The rooftop. The string lights that someone in events had finally gotten right this year. I remembered Thompson from accounting, doing something embarrassing near the bar. I remembered the music being too loud and then suddenly too quiet. And I remembered her, Susan, standing slightly apart from everyone else the way she always did. Not because she was excluded, but because she had decided the distance herself. She was wearing something dark green that night. I remembered that detail with strange clarity. Dark green, and the way the rooftop lights caught the curve of her shoulders when she turned after that. Fog. How did I get here? I asked. She took a slow sip of her coffee. You were in no condition to get yourself anywhere. Your friend, the loud one from marketing, Davis. She said his name like it tasted mildly unpleasant. He was in a worse state than you were, and clearly not a viable option. You had my address because of the Henderson files we exchanged last month. She paused. Apparently, Drunken has excellent memory for professional correspondence. I exhaled slowly. And you just let me in. You were sitting on my building steps at midnight, Richard. For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not softness exactly, but the suggestion of it. I wasn't going to leave you there. I looked around the room again. The second pillow had a slight indent. My jacket was folded neatly over the back of a chair near the window. Did we? I stopped. She raised an eyebrow. I cleared my throat. I mean, I just want to understand what you're asking, she said, her tone perfectly measured, is whether anything happened between us. She tilted her head slightly, and that almost smile returned. And I find it very interesting that your first concern isn't thank you for not leaving me on the sidewalk. Thank you, I said immediately, genuinely. And also, did anything happen? She stood up then, smoothing the front of her robe with the same practiced composure she used to end conference calls. Finish your coffee, she said. There's a spare toothbrush in the bathroom. Second drawer. She picked up her own cup and moved toward the door. Then she paused, one hand resting lightly on the doorframe, and looked back at me over her shoulder. I'll tell you what I remember, she said quietly, when I decide you're ready to hear it. And then she was gone. I sat there in her bed, in her room that smelled like her, holding coffee she had made exactly the way I liked it. And I realized that the most terrifying thing about Susan wasn't her silence in boardrooms. It was this, the way she could leave a room and take all the oxygen with her. Monday came the way it always does, indifferent and slightly too early. I stood in the elevator of Hargrove and Associates, watching the floor numbers climb, and gave myself a very firm internal speech. She was my boss. She was the boss. The woman who had restructured an entire department over a quarterly report discrepancy and sent 3 people home with nothing but a polite email and a severance packet. Whatever had happened Saturday night, whatever hadn't happened, belonged in a sealed compartment, locked, labeled, and pushed to the very back of my professional consciousness. The elevator doors opened. Susan was standing at the reception desk, speaking to her assistant Maya, with a stack of folders pressed against her chest. She was wearing a deep navy blazer, fitted at the waist, her dark hair pulled back in that precise way that made her look like someone who had never once been uncertain about anything. She didn't look up. I walked past. Richard. I stopped. She still didn't look up from the folder she'd opened. The Callaway presentation is at 2. I need your revised projections on my desk by 11. Of course, I said, calm, professional, completely normal. And Richard, now she looked up. Her eyes held that same quiet amusement from Sunday morning, buried just deep enough that only someone who'd seen it up close would recognize it. Try to get through today without losing a shoe. Maya blinked. I felt the back of my neck go warm. Noted, I said, and walked away with as much dignity as a man can carry when his boss has just referenced something nobody else in the room understands. The next few days settled into a strange new rhythm. On the surface, nothing had changed. Susan ran meetings with the same surgical precision. She spoke in complete sentences, while everyone else offered half-formed ideas. She had a way of asking a single quiet question that made a room full of executives suddenly rethink everything they'd prepared. But there were moments, small ones. The kind that don't show up in meeting minutes. A Tuesday afternoon when I stayed late to finish the Callaway revisions and found a cup of coffee on my desk. Cream, no sugar, with no note and no explanation. The kitchen was empty when I checked. A Thursday where I caught her watching me during a presentation I was leading. Not evaluating. Just watching. And when I glanced over, she didn't look away. She simply turned the page of her notepad like she hadn't been doing anything at all. Then Friday arrived. The project ran long, and by 9 o'clock, only the 2 of us remained on the floor. The city hummed quietly outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. I was packing up my bag when she appeared at my office doorway, coat already on, bag over one shoulder. I'm sharing a cab, she said. It wasn't a question. We rode in the kind of silence that isn't uncomfortable. The kind that has weight and texture. Rain had started against the windows. The city blurred past in streaks of amber and gray. Can I ask you something? I said. You can try. At the party, I kept my eyes forward. Before everything got foggy. Were you having a good time? Because you always look like you're somewhere else entirely. A pause. I was, she said. And then, quieter, particularly toward the end of the evening. I turned to look at her. She was already looking out her window. The cab slowed at her building. She stepped out, then ducked her head back in through the open door. 11 sharp, Monday. Don't be late. A beat. And Richard, you still owe me a thank you that doesn't immediately follow a question about yourself. The door closed. I sat back and smiled at the rain the entire ride home. The business trip to Portland was supposed to be 2 days. A client dinner, a morning presentation, and a flight back before the city had time to miss us. Susan had organized the itinerary herself, precise, efficient, zero margin for deviation. I had packed accordingly. What she had not scheduled was the storm. It rolled in Thursday evening while we were still at dinner with the Mercer Group, a slow, heavy Pacific Northwest rain that by 9 o'clock had grounded every outbound flight and turned the airport into a very expensive waiting room. The hotel had one room left. She took it without hesitation. There's a sofa, she said, sliding her keycard into the door without looking at me. I wasn't going to say anything. You were thinking it loudly. The room was quiet and warm, rain pressing steadily against the tall windows. She changed in the bathroom. I loosened my tie and sat on the sofa and pretended to check emails I had no interest in reading. She came out in a simple gray shirt and dark trousers, hair down, face clean, of the careful professional composure. She wore like a second blazer. She looked different, not smaller, just more present somehow, like the real version of a photograph I'd only ever seen in print. She sat at the small desk near the window with a glass of water and opened her laptop. 10 minutes of silence passed. You don't have to sit over there like you're in trouble, she said without looking up. I moved to the chair near the window. The rain filled the space between us. Can I ask you something? I said. You asked me that in a cab last week. You didn't fully answer. She looked up then. In the low lamplight, something in her expression was quieter than I had ever seen it. What's the question, Richard? I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. Why do you stand apart from everyone? At the party, at dinners, even in rooms full of people who respect you. You're always just slightly outside of it. The silence stretched long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she closed her laptop. Because rooms full of people who respect you, she said slowly, are very different from rooms where anyone actually sees you. She looked out at the rain. I learned a long time ago that being capable is useful. Being needed keeps people close, but it's a particular kind of close, functional, professional. A pause. Safe? Safe from what? She turned back to me. Her eyes were steady, but something behind them was not. From the part where you let someone see past the capability, and then they decide it's not enough. The room felt very still. Who decided that? I asked quietly. She picked up her water glass. That's a longer answer than tonight has time for. But her voice had lost its edge. It was just honest, open in a way I suspected very few people ever got to witness. I looked at her, really looked, and said, for what it's worth, I've never once thought capability was the most interesting thing about you. She went very still. What is? She asked, carefully. Like the question costs something. The way you notice everything, I said, and choose so deliberately what to do with it. She looked at me for a long moment, then the corner of her mouth lifted, not the controlled almost smile from her office. Something quieter, something that felt earned. You're not what I expected, Richard. Is that good? She stood, moved toward the window, and looked out at the rain-soaked city below. Ask me again, she said softly. When I've decided you're ready to hear that answer too. I looked at the back of her, the curve of her shoulders, the loose fall of her hair, and felt something settle in my chest that had no professional category whatsoever. His name was Victor Hale, Senior Vice President of Strategic Operations, 48 years old, and the kind of man who smiled at you while quietly repositioning everything around you. He had been at Hargrove and Associates for 11 years, long enough to know where every body was buried and precisely which floors had the thinnest walls. I had never trusted him, not because of anything dramatic. It was smaller than that. The way he laughed a half-second after everyone else, like he was calculating the right moment. The way his eyes moved around a room before his body did. The way he had looked at Susan during the quarterly review last spring. Not with respect, but with the particular patience of someone waiting for a door to open. He wanted her position. Everyone knew it. Nobody said it. What I hadn't known, what I should have seen coming, was that he had been watching us. It started the Tuesday after Portland. I arrived at my desk to find an email from HR. A routine inquiry, they called it. A reminder of the company's professional conduct policy, attached as a PDF I had signed 2 years ago and never thought about since. No names, no specifics, just the quiet, clinical language of institutional concern. My stomach dropped. I went to Susan's office. She was already on the phone when I knocked, but she held up one finger and finished the call with the same unreadable composure she brought to everything. When she set the receiver down, she looked at me, and I knew immediately that she had received the same email. Close the door, she said. I did. How much do you know about Victor Hale? She asked. Enough, I said. How long has he been building this? Longer than Portland. She leaned back in her chair, fingers laced together on the desk. He's been compiling. Small things, observations, the cab on Friday, the coffee that appeared on your desk. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Someone in this building has been reporting to him. The realization moved through me cold and slow. The party, I said. She nodded once. He was there, I said, remembering now. Victor near the bar. Victor watching the rooftop with that patient, calculating stillness. He saw me leave. He saw us leave, she corrected quietly. The distinction landed heavily between us. What does he have? I asked. Implication, she said, which in a corporate environment is frequently more damaging than evidence. She stood and moved to the window, the same way she had in Portland, looking out at something only she could fully see. He's filed an informal inquiry, suggesting that a personal relationship between us may have compromised project assignments and performance evaluations over the past quarter. That's not true. I know that, she turned. But truth in these situations requires proof, and proof requires time we may not have. He's requesting an internal review. If the board approves it, she stopped. Your career, I said. It wasn't a question. My career can survive scrutiny, she said firmly. What I won't survive, what I refuse to survive, is allowing someone like Victor Hale to rewrite a narrative that isn't his to write. Something moved behind her eyes. Something that looked, for the first time, like genuine fear, not of losing her title. Of losing control of her own story. I crossed the room. I stopped close enough that I could see the slight tension in her shoulders. The way she was holding herself together with pure, practiced will. Susan. I kept my voice low. He doesn't know what happened that night. He's guessing. She looked up at me. Then we have one advantage, she said quietly. What's that? Her eyes held mine. Steady, complicated, and carrying everything we hadn't yet said out loud. We know the truth, she said. We just have to decide how much of it we're willing to tell. We met that evening outside the office. A small Italian place 3 blocks east. The kind of restaurant that doesn't take reservations and keeps the lighting low enough that conversations stay private. Susan was already there when I arrived, seated in the corner booth, a glass of water in front of her untouched. She had changed out of her work clothes. A simple dark blouse, hair down, no armor, just her. I sat across from her and didn't say anything for a moment. The restaurant murmured around us. Someone's candle flickered. You said this morning that we know the truth, I said finally. So tell me, all of it, what actually happened that night? She looked at her water glass, then at me. You really don't remember? Fragments, I said honestly. The rooftop, you in green. And then, nothing coherent until your ceiling. Something crossed her face, not quite a smile. Something more tender than that. You found me on the rooftop, she began quietly. Everyone else had moved inside. I had been standing there for a while, longer than I intended. She paused. You walked over with 2 glasses of whiskey, handed me one, and said, You look like someone who's been given very good news that they don't quite believe yet. I stared at her. I said that? You did. The tenderness deepened. I asked what made you say it, and you told me that you had noticed, for a long time, that I always looked slightly surprised when something was genuinely good. Like I was waiting for it to be taken back. The candle between us flickered. My chest felt tight. What did you say? I asked. I said you were dangerously perceptive for someone on his 3rd whiskey. She looked down, and then I didn't say anything for a while, because you were right, and I wasn't prepared for that. The restaurant continued its quiet murmur around us. I waited. We talked, she continued, for a long time, about nothing important and everything important. The way conversations go when defenses are down and the night feels separate from real life. She traced the rim of her water glass slowly. And then you told me something. What did I tell you? She looked up. Her eyes were very steady and very honest. You told me that walking into that building every morning was the one part of your day that felt like it mattered. Not because of the work. A pause. Because of me. The silence between us was complete. Richard, she said carefully, you were vulnerable and honest in the way people only manage when the whiskey has removed all the sensible objections. And she stopped, smoothed the edge of the tablecloth with 2 fingers. I didn't dismiss it. I should have, perhaps. Professionally, I absolutely should have, but you didn't. But I didn't. She exhaled slowly. You fell asleep in the cab. I brought you upstairs because leaving you in a vehicle felt irresponsible. I put you in my bed because my sofa has a broken spring that I keep forgetting to fix. I slept in the chair. She met my eyes. Nothing happened, Richard. Nothing physical. But, she stopped again. But, I said softly. But something happened, she admitted. In the conversation on that rooftop. Something I haven't been able to file away neatly since. Her voice dropped to barely above the restaurant noise. And that frightens me considerably more than Victor Hale. I reached across the table. My hand covered hers. She looked down at it. She didn't pull away. You told me, I said quietly, that you'd tell me what you remember when you decided I was ready. She looked up. I think you just told me, I said. And I think you already know what I want to say back. Her eyes were bright. Not with tears, with the particular intensity of someone standing at the edge of a decision they've been circling for weeks. Then say it, she whispered. I looked at her across that small candlelit table and said the thing I had been carrying since Sunday morning in her room. I don't want to go back to before the party, I said. I don't want to pretend the rooftop didn't happen, or that the cab ride home didn't happen, or that Portland didn't happen. I've spent my whole professional life being careful and measured and appropriate. I paused, and I have never once felt about a ceiling the way I felt about yours. She blinked, then she laughed. It was the first time I had ever heard Susan laugh without any architecture around it. No management, no timing, no careful deployment. It was sudden and genuine, and it changed her entire face. The lines around her eyes deepened. Her shoulders dropped 2 full inches. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. A ceiling, she repeated. I'm serious. I know, she said, still smiling. That's what makes it wonderful. She turned her hand over beneath mine. Her fingers closed around my hand, deliberate, unhurried, certain. I have spent 11 years, she said quietly, building something that nobody could take from me. A reputation. A standard. A distance that kept everything functional and nothing messy. She looked at our joined hands. And then you sat down next to me on a rooftop with 2 glasses of whiskey and noticed something about me that I had never said out loud to anyone. Nah. That you're always waiting for good things to be taken back, I said. Yes. Her voice was barely above a whisper. And I need you to know, I am terrified. Not of Victor Hale, not of the review, not of what the board thinks. She looked up. I am terrified of wanting something this much and being wrong about it. I held her gaze. You're not wrong about it. She studied me for a long, quiet moment, the way she studied everything, carefully and completely. Then she nodded once, small, decisive. The same nod she used to close important agreements. Victor Hale's internal review lasted 9 days. What he had was implication and proximity. A cab ride, a business trip with a shared hotel room during a documented weather delay, and the unverifiable observation of 2 people leaving a party in the same direction. Susan submitted the hotel's official storm records, the client dinner receipts, and a statement from the Mercer Group confirming the professional nature of the Portland meeting. What Victor didn't account for was Maya, Susan's assistant, who had quietly documented every assignment, every project allocation, every performance review for 2 years. Every decision was traceable. Every evaluation was clean. The board closed the inquiry on a Wednesday. Victor Hale was asked to take an extended leave of absence pending a review of his own conduct. Specifically, the manner in which he had gathered and deployed information about colleagues. Susan sent me a single text that afternoon. Dinner. Same place. 7 o'clock. And this time, bring a better story than a ceiling. 6 months later, the company holiday party was held on the same rooftop, same string lights, same city humming 40 floors below. Different everything else. I found her near the edge, standing slightly apart, the way she always had. But this time, when I walked over with 2 glasses, she turned before I reached her. Like she had been watching for me, she was wearing dark green again. You remembered, I said. I remember everything, she said. Do you? I handed her the glass. Our fingers touched, neither of us moved away. Every detail, I said. She looked out at the city, bright and boundless and entirely unconcerned with the 2 of us, and she smiled. Not the controlled almost smile, not the boardroom composure. The real one, the one that reached her eyes and stayed there. Good, she said softly. And she leaned her shoulder against mine. And we stayed there, above the noise, above the politics, above everything that had tried to make this smaller than it was, until the city lights blurred warm and gold around us. And for the first time in a very long time, neither of us was waiting for it to be taken back. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that the most important conversations happen when the defenses finally come down. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. There are more stories like this one waiting for you.